and go.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon in this our webinar entitled Countering Violent Behaviors, the Disruption of Radical Behaviors in Trinidad and Tobago. My name is Adriana Archer. I am the Program Dean for Security Administration and Emergency Management Department. Unfortunately, the moderator for this webinar, Mr. Dennis Brown, he is unable to be with us this afternoon, so I will be your moderator for this evening's proceedings. So just to give you a little bit about what we'll be discussing here this afternoon. We know that in Trinidad and Tobago, radicalization among young men is an issue of concern. The radical views of conditions in the country have manifested in a steady increase in violent crimes. Gang-related violence, robberies, and housebreaking are some of the common crimes committed by young men in Trinidad and Tobago. If the increasing rate of violent crime is left unaddressed, citizens' confidence in the ability of law enforcement agencies to provide safety and security will continue to deteriorate. So, to begin this evening's proceedings, I would like to call on our first presenter for this afternoon, Mr. Earl Horn. And a little bit of Mr. Horn. He has been a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service for over 18 years. He was last attached to the Fire Service School as a training instructor. He is currently on secondment from the Fire Service as a manager of Health, Safety and Security Services at the Ministry of Education. In addition, as an adjunct lecturer, he's also an adjunct lecturer in the Security Administration and Emergency Management Department at Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Most importantly, he is a proud graduate of the Civilian Conservation Corps. Mr. Horn is the holder of a master's in National Security and Intelligence Studies from the University of the Southern Caribbean. He also holds a Bachelor of Honors in Security Administration and Management from Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. He also holds an Associate with Honors in Security Administration and Management from Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, a Diploma with Honors in Emergency Management, also from Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and a Certificate with Honors in Emergency Management from none other than Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Right, so without further ado, I would like to hand you all over to Mr. Horn, who will commence our evening's proceedings. Mr. Horn?
Thank you very much, Ms. Archer. Pleasant afternoon to the viewing public. Kindly allow me to share my screen. It is my pleasure this evening to have a discussion about countering violent extremism or violent behavior, looking at a focus on proactive approach to crime prevention. In Trinidad and Tobago, we can argue that the crime situation is of great concern. If left unaddressed, this will progressively get worse. So my purpose today is to define radicalization and look at it, analyze it, to see if that is a possible cause for the escalating crime situation and to identify counter-violent extremism strategies that could be used to disrupt the radicalization process and have the positive effect of reducing serious crimes that is affecting Trinidad and Tobago. As you can see on the screen, but the numbers may be a little bit blurred, homicides in Trinidad and Tobago has been increasing since 2014. Different persons, there are different schools of thought to argue what it was the factors that contributed to this escalating crime situation. Is it driven by gang violence, the ease of access to weapons that we are seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, rivalry between or among different gangs? As we look closely, we can see in 2020 there was a reduction in the crime situation, which could be because of COVID, because we went through the COVID pandemic. So it slowed the trend of increasing crime in Trinidad and Tobago. But after COVID, we can see that the numbers return to the trend that was pre-COVID, because they are fighting, and it is assumed that it will continue into the future as we have different gangs operating in Trinidad and Tobago who may be fighting amongst themselves. And this could intensify if left unchecked. So what can we attribute to this increase in violence? Is it radicalization? Because according to McCurley and Moselenko, they looked at radicalization as an enhanced preparation for intergroup conflict, because they had a both functional and descriptive way of looking at radicalization. There's the assumption from both that radicalization occurs because of a change in beliefs, in feelings, in behavior that justify intergroup violence. And within those groups, there is the demand for sacrifice to defend the group. Now, we would see radicalization playing out mostly as reasons for terrorism. But terrorism is a crime. Not all acts of terrorism. All acts of terrorism is a crime, but not all crimes are terrorism. So we will not focus on terrorism for today's presentation. We will focus on crimes. To see if radicalization is that process where persons from different warring factions have those ideologies and those beliefs that they have to control particular tools. They are responsible for particular geographic areas, and therefore they have to do anything possible in order to defend that. It is also defined as the acceptance of violence, the use of violence or undemocratic means to achieve whatever the goal is settled by that group. So we are seeing the increase in serious crimes in this country could be attributed to persons' acceptance of violence is the way to achieve their objectives, to get what they need. To send a particular message, they must use violence. They must use means that are outside of the confines of the law to do what they have to do. And those things must be analyzed for us to come up with strategies to disrupt that process. Because the factors that drive persons to become radicalized are known as the push and pull factors. The push factors are those circumstances that exist that makes the individual current lifestyle unattractive. So they may be feeling socially marginalized. They may be feeling repression from the government. And these are things that they will come up with internally, intra within themselves and inter within their group. So they think that the government is repressing them. The high instances of unemployment. would push persons into developing those radical ideas, the acceptance of that type of violence and the use of violence to achieve the objectives. Or the pull factors, which are the circumstances that make those violent extremist ideologies seem to be attractive. It draws those persons in to accept that. So they may be looking for a sense of belongingness. They are not feeling a part of their friendship groups. They are not feeling a part of their family. So they are searching, looking, trying to figure out where they belong. And they find it in those groups. Financial incentives. Because of the instances of unemployment, high rates of unemployment, those persons may believe, I should accept violence. I should use these unlawful means to increase their earning power. So they look at it as financial incentives, or their desire for adventure, to do something outside of. And the youths these days, and they have this state of mind where they want to call themselves fully dunce, and these things, they want to seek out that. Those could be pull factors that make those persons accept that they must join these groups and commit criminal offenses. But that situation must not be left unchecked or unaddressed in our country. Therefore, we must try to figure out strategies. How could we go about disrupting the process that allows persons from moving from one state to that end product where they accept violence? So we can look at countering violent extremism. It is a range of activities that are aimed to prevent and to respond to violent extremism or violent behaviors. Those strategies develop trust within communities, which will ensure that the communities develop resilience against those factors that will pull or push persons into radicalization. The protection of their rights and liberties. Because while we want to address the increase in crime, it should be done in a way that does not have a negative pushback where it appears that persons' rights are being trampled upon. We must be very careful as to how we address the criminal elements. There must be engagement with persons who would have already become radicalized. Some persons may argue, well, it is too late for them. So let us start with others, the younger generation, and try to change what is going on from the younger generation. But persons who have already gone through that, we must work to helping those persons, to reform those persons, to restore those persons to a state of normalcy, to be someone of value in our society. And it's also about strengthening community relationships with law enforcement and social services. Because countering violent extremism must be a whole of government approach. It must not be an approach that comes from national security only. Because we have used those types of strategies for decades. And the crime is continuing to spiral out of control. Therefore, we must look at it from a different perspective. What else could be done to disrupt this, to reduce crime in Trinidad and Tobago? So we must look at comprehensive countering violent extremism strategies to include programs that will prevent those preventative programs or remedial to repair what has already been damaged. So that will come in the form of countering radicalization and de-radicalization. Because countering radicalization seeks to mitigate the factors that could lead to persons becoming radicalization, to eliminate the push and pull factors within the community or our communities that will force persons to get into that type of lifestyle. So you're preventing that transition into that lifestyle. And de-radicalization interventions, those are reactive, because law enforcement oftentimes is one step behind crime. So we must look at it not as a bad thing to react, but once there is a reaction, lessons must be learned, trends must be recognized, so that strategies could be put in place to deal with persons who were already radicalized, how they came to that point, and then look at those who are coming behind to figure out how to stop them from getting to that point. So we want to disengage persons using these strategies. But developing comprehensive counter-violent extremism strategies must be done very carefully. Understanding the needs of different communities is vital to developing the correct strategy that will affect that community positively. How could we do that? At the national level, when developing counter-violent extremism strategies, state government must support those agencies at the local government level. Because the best way to develop this is through the communities. Go down to the lowest level and build each community one at a time. Analyze each community to understand what factors exist in those communities that needs to be eliminated, mitigated, or remedied. Because at the local government level, those agencies are best suited to identify the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities that exist in those communities. This is why we're going to see, going forward, the importance of looking at community policing. So we are analyzing the communities, can develop a strategy that is suited for a particular community without first understanding the conditions that exist in those communities. They are vulnerable. They have weaknesses. So those strategies that are developed should be designed and implemented with the inclusion of all stakeholders. There's a whole of government approach we are dealing with. Agencies that at the state level and agencies at the local government level. We should look at developing those strategies to include community policing, to include the regional corporations, because they have the officers also there that could recognize things within the community. Go back to those strategies where the police officers are seen as friendly neighborhood officers. We have to develop those strategies in mind. At the local government level, they should be empowered and given spaces, persons in the community that is, given spaces to identify and to discuss grievances that make them vulnerable. So we should go back to the community centers, to having those stronghold meetings, to getting communities together outside, getting the elders to communicate and educate the younger ones. We want to create those safe spaces within the communities, because the grievances that exist in each community, though they may have commonalities that go throughout, there would be nuances, there would be differences that we must analyze to be able to implement the best strategy. So we have to get the trust between police officers and the community to be strengthened. Programs must be developed to strengthen those things. Now, there is a need to have the militarized aspect of the police service. But we have to go back to looking at the hearts and minds approach. Looking at the sergeant within the community is known. The children developing that respect for the officers as they walk the streets and engage with them. To put on that softer approach. Because the hard approach is not as effective as we want it to be. So therefore, we should soften hearts and minds. Develop that trust with police and public. Though no one is arguing that this is an easy task. But to regain our country, we must be willing to put in the work. To take those harsh measures, to take that long road of recovery, of changing the mindset of persons in our communities towards the law enforcement officers. Because community policing is one of the most effective approaches, because they have the greatest reach within the communities. So members of the community must have that type of trust in the police officers that they can call upon them to discipline their children. But this is not to remove the responsibility of the family onto the police. We have to ensure that we are working hand in hand in everything that we are doing. Because strong family relationships is an excellent strategy to preventing radicalization. I spoke about whole of government before. We need to have services that provides that support, that counseling, that family mediation. Give the families within the community that space. Teach them the skills. So we have counselors and psychologists, and all these people have a specific role to play, a very important role to play, to strengthen the family bonds. Because the family is considered as the #1 institution. So we need to have the family strengthened in our society to ensure that we are in a strong position, that external factors cannot encourage children or even adults to stray onto that radicalized path. Searching for belongingness, because that is something that they would not have to look for if we strengthen the institution of the family. So the social services aspect of state government should be extended to local government to ensure that they can go into the communities and provide those types of services at the lowest level, to break down that bureaucratic process of families accessing help when they need it. Because from time to time, families go through stuff and things become difficult. But we have to ensure that they have those safe spaces, that they can engage with the local police, the community police that is in the community, to have dialogue with them, to have the social services with them. So we have to strengthen the family bond in Trinidad and Tobago. Professor always spoke about the soft approach, the non-military approach that should take pride of place when developing policies to handle radicalized individuals. We have to look at educational programs, vocational programs, sporting programs, positive television, radio, and social media programming. One thing that leads persons to becoming radicalized is the inability to perform well in school. I did a study in 2014 called The Reasons for Juvenile Delinquency Among Males 16 to 21. I went into YTC at the time, which is changed over to YTRC, trying to understand why they would have engaged in that. And one of the things that came out in that study was persons feeling ashamed. Or the young people say they're feeling that type of way. That school is going on, persons are catching up, and oftentimes teachers pay attention to the brightest students. They are the ones that they focus on. But the ones who needs the attention are the ones who are left behind. So we should develop those educational programs within the communities to help persons with remedial math, remedial English, writing, science, for those who are so inclined. We should develop and expand on programs like ALTA, adult literacy, so that even though persons are older, they don't feel like they are illiterate or they have no value to society, which could allow them to go down that path of radicalization. So we should strengthen the educational programs that already exist and expand on those programs if possible to include specific communities. Not all persons will be so educationally inclined. We have to go back to developing those vocational programs and removing the stigma that is attached to those programs. Because if it's something that we should have learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, was that persons who are skilled with a particular trade never went hungry. This is something that we need to emphasize for the youths who are not so academically inclined. Why not push our youths and persons who are going on the wrong path into agriculture, into farming? Invest more into agricultural programs, because those things are seen as dirty work, and that is beyond or beneath some of us. But the incentives that are attached to farming and agriculture, they are not widely known. So those things should be explained, expressed to persons who are not so academically inclined, so that they understand that it is an honest dollar. And it's not only an honest dollar, they make a lot of money. So we need to continue to focus on those things, develop and expand those programs. Use that type of skill to bring back our cocoa and coffee industry, so it have a knock-on effect that we can achieve different things while disrupting the process of radicalization. We should have an emphasis on sporting programs as a way for youth to engage in positive ways of removing stress or getting out anger. Because the discipline of boxing, and this is a discipline, can get persons who have that pent-up type of rage to channel that into a disciplined area. I oftentimes look back on the live sport program, very controversial in its day. But if that program was applied in the way that it was intended to be applied, or should have been applied, that would have been the source of an excellent de-radicalization program. Because when we engage in using sport as a mode of disrupting the radicalization process, it must not be a one-off program. It needs to be consistent. Because it's easy to go into the communities and say, all right, let us have a football tournament, a basketball tournament, and you'll get some prize money. But what happens after that tournament is over? Where is the follow-up? So when designing those sporting programs, we have to be very careful not to have it one-off, and then they are idle for long periods of time, and then they may be taking the money, the prize money, and reinvesting it into wrong things. So it must be programs designed and are sustainable over time to give them a way out so that they don't need to search for other things to do. I looked at the Commissioner's Cup under past Commissioner, Mr. Griffith. And that program was an excellent initiative, in my opinion, of course. Looking at it strictly as a countering violent extremism or countering violent behavior strategy to engage, and this was twofold, because then you also build trust between community and the police or law enforcement officers. But again, those strategies must be implemented in a way that it is not seen as one-off, but it's continuous. That persons could channel, and it could be a stepping stone for something else, because they're going to learn discipline from within there. We could look at positive television, radio, and social media programming. So you'll start off with traditionally television and radio programs. Get influential persons that people who we are targeting would listen to. When developing that strategy, it must not be developed for persons who they would not listen to. You have to get influential members who are on the positive road, who can speak to persons who may be going down that radicalization route. But we have to include social media. Why? Because a lot of the persons that need to be targeted do not watch TV or listen to certain types of radio programming. So you have to go to the urban stations to meet persons. We have to meet them where they are and use different social media platforms to gain their attention, to spread that message, to disrupt the narrative that going down that radicalization road somehow leads to something that is positive. We have to show those persons, people who may have lived that type of lifestyle and change, use those persons to try to bring those persons out of the feeling that it is the only option is to go down that road. So as I close, I just want to reiterate that our crime situation seems to be very disheartening. However, at this point in time, I would not agree that it is out of control. But if we continue to use the same strategies that are not working and not design other strategies that could help disrupt the process of radicalization, help remove the factors that lead persons down the road of committing crimes, we'll continue to end up in a situation that year after year we are studying and looking on to see if we are going to break a particular record when it comes to murders and other serious crimes. So we must engage in looking at the softer approach, the hearts and minds approach as a strategy to countering violent behavior. All right, thank you. Sacha, your mic is muted.
just put it on. Thanks very much, Mr. Horner. All right, let me just take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Dennis Brown, our moderator. I said earlier, he could not have been with us, but he would have worked through his challenges, his Wi-Fi challenges, and he's now here to take over his responsibilities as the moderator. So, Mr. Brown, it's all over to you. Mr. Brown, are you there?
Yes, are you all hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are. We are.
Oh,
yes.
I think some. Right. First.
Oh, I think you're still having some challenges, Mr. Brown. You are still having some challenges.
And foremost, good evening to everyone.
Mr. Brown, you're having some challenges still. So let me take over. Please let me take over. You're having some challenges. You are having some challenges, Mr. Brown.
I think she left. Yes. Yes, seems to be some continuous.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Yes, there seems to be continuous.
Yes, you're having some serious challenges, Mr. Brown, so I will continue. Okay?
Are you all hearing?
No, we are not hearing you. We are having some serious challenges. So I will continue. Please. Yeah. I will continue, Mr. Brown. Thank you. Right, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so thank you, like I was saying, thank you very much, Mr. Horn, for that presentation. Speaking about the push and the pull factors and, some of the things that, we in the society here actually needs to do, to bring about some kind of a solution and, remedies to this whole issue as it pertains to countering violent extremism. At this point, we would like to take any questions. If anyone has any question for Mr. Horn, you could ask your question, or you could post it online, and it will be sent to us. All right. Okay, we don't seem to have any questions so far. So let me get into our second speaker for this afternoon. And he is Mr. McDonald Jacob, former acting commissioner of police. So, Mr. Jacob, he was a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service from the period 1981 to 2023. He acted as Deputy Commissioner of Police Investigations and Intelligence from the 10th of February 2020 and was appointed to the post on May the 1st, 2021. Mr. Jacob assumed the post of Acting Commissioner of Police from December 17, 2021 to December 7, 2022. He was involved in criminal investigations for over 25 years, covering the different ranks from police constable to senior superintendent. He was one of the pioneers in the establishment of the Crime and Problem Analysis Branch of the TTPS, the instituting of the Divisional Communication Operational Centers, and also the ComStat model. Deputy Commissioner was also Deputy Commissioner, Intelligence and Investigations, Assistant Commissioner, Northern Region and Southern Region, appointed Assistant Superintendent Kappa of the Kappa Branch, Senior Superintendent Criminal Investigations Department, and was also Senior Superintendent Port of Spain Division and Northern Division. He is one of the qualified crime and intelligence analysts in Trinidad and Tobago, in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, having trained at the George Mason University, Washington. He also trained with the United Nations Organization on Drugs and Crime in Belize as crime intelligence analyst for managers and Regional Drug Law Enforcement Center. Mr. Jacob also lectured at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies in the Security Management and Emergency Management Department for 10 years. He has attained, or he holds a Master's of Philosophy in Criminology and Criminal Justice from the University of the West Indies, and his study was based on the utilization on information technology and artificial intelligence in crime fighting. He also possessed a LLB law degree from the University of London and a postgraduate diploma in mediation studies from the University of the West Indies. Mr. Jacob did several programs at tertiary institutions in such as the Police Leadership National Policing Improvement Agency, at the Leadership and Management Institution of the United Kingdom, Project Management at the University of the West Indies, and possesses a technical diploma in supervisory and leadership from the San Fernando Technical Institute. He also attained a leadership and management certificate from CRESCOM, in addition to a certificate in supervision and management for police executive officers. Mr. Jacob was also selected as the best performing divisional commander in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in 2016, and he was the winner of the Association of Caribbean Commissioners of Police Top Crime Fighter Award in the Caribbean in 2017. Before his retirement, on the 21st of January 2023, he instituted the Active Directive Grid Patrol System of Crime Fighting for the patrol units of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. MacDonald Jacob. And Mr. Jacob will be presenting to us on a look at the psychosocial dynamics that underpins gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Jacob?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for that introduction to all the persons who are listening in. We have some challenges at this side at the Labour College also, where the audience will be unable to see the PowerPoint, but that will not hamper us from doing our program this afternoon. I am dealing with the psychosocial dynamics that underpin gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm of the firm belief it is really a battle of the mind. This evening, I will be identifying some of the studies that were done, why I have concluded it's a battle of the mind. And in so doing, we'll be able to identify some of the solutions to some of the problems that we are having within Trinidad and Tobago, and how we can really deal with the whole aspect of the radicalism that may be existing. As I indicated, it is definitely a battle of the mind. In the work done, we will realize that in Trinidad and Tobago, there are several gangs existing in Trinidad and Tobago. We have persons who are involved in activities as it relates to the illegal quarrying. We have situations in relation to drugs. And recently, we heard a lot about home invasions, extortion. We have transnational organized gangs existing, right? We also have local organized gangs existing. And in addition to that, we also have the whole aspect of the transnational organized gangs. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a variety of gangs existing on the platform. The bottom line, when you look at it, in relation to the extortion, the blackmail, the robberies, the stolen vehicles, the drugs, the firearms trafficking, the human trafficking, the illegal quarrying, it involves the whole aspect of wealth accumulation and how these persons in their operations is to accumulate wealth. In some instances, they deem it as means of survival. Most of the criminologists and psychologists look at it from a psychoanalytical perspective or a psychodynamic perspective, where they look at from childhood, from the young person's childhood experience and how they are socialized within the community could provide a sort of unconscious kind of experience that may make them feel that the way how to operate is what we are seeing today. Therefore, this negative socialization they experience cause weak egos, associate with immaturity, poor social skills, and excessive dependence on others. This is where the gang affiliation comes in. This is where the charismatic leader within the community who are involved in negative activities can in fact influence the young persons to join gangs. As I said earlier, the bottom line in most instances is in fact the economic aspect. Some offenders or some of the persons who are involved in gangs, it even be very difficult for them to even understand the school rules that may have serious consequences to their action. Robert Merton and Durkheim and Robert Merton in their studies look at the strain and enemy theory. In our society, there are certain standards that are set, certain measuring rods that persons strive to achieve. And when they cannot achieve these goals that are set, they find innovative ways and means of achieving the goal. It involves a certain measure of anger, frustration, disappointment, and a measure of depression. Because these goals that are set, they cannot attain these goals. Yes, we set apart as it relates to education and whether or not the persons are willing to stay within the system, whether or not at the end of the education process, they are able to get the necessary jobs. But in the most instances, the persons who are involved in these activities are not finishing their education in school, or they just have some, I call it presenteeism, where they are just in the school and nothing is happening. I want to reinforce this point. This evening I'm dealing with gangs, but I'm dealing with the street gangs, the conventional street gangs, and not the white-collared corporate gangs that exist. That is for another discussion. So you'll find that I'll be spending some time in this particular area. This strain becomes very, very, very dangerous when there's collective strain. Meaning to say, when an entire group are of the opinion that they are being marginalized, that they cannot achieve the necessary goals that are set, and that collective thinking come together, and then you have a charismatic leader who involved in gangs is talking to these young people. They lack the necessary coping skills. Robert Agnew in his study indicated that and emphasized the need that if those persons don't have the necessary coping skills, the likelihood that they will end up being radicalized and be involved in negative activities. So the lack of coping skills will take you in a certain direction. But Mesner or Rosenfield went further, and they talk about institutional enemy. And this is an area that we all must pay attention to. Because in institutional enemy, they look at how institutions within the society operates and sometimes operates on an economic platform. Some of our main institutions are the family, the churches, the educational system. We have institutions existing. We even have the aspect of sports clubs. We have different institutions. However, if someone, I like to use church for example, if someone is attending a church, which is really a buffer to help the socialization process for young people, and when they go to these institutions, there's a constant call for the economic aspect. Some persons will tell you you have situations where you have to do 4 collections, some 3 collections. The persons don't have. They will feel that sense of enemy, that sense of strain. If while going to the school, they are required to wear a certain type of sneakers, dressed in a particular way, those simple things add a certain amount of strain, and the whole aspect of the enemy comes in. Because they cannot achieve these things and they will feel marginalized. Therefore, persons and institutions need to be very careful. Within the school structure, the manner in which teachers may deal with the young people, because you will have a variety of young persons in the classroom. You'll have persons who are from the upper class, middle class, working class, lower working class, and the things that you say and how you operate and the demands of the school may in fact cause a measure of enemy and strain. And how will the young persons respond? Sometimes they respond by what they know best, and that might be the use of violence. So that social culture that we talk about that develop within the community, which transcends itself into the institutions, will affect young persons where they feel that lack of sense of belonging. And this is where you have the radicalism that can take place. But further to that, it can drive them to the point of what we call relative deprivation. This is where the persons reach the point that they feel that they are being marginalized by the general society. And being marginalized by the general society in such a way that they believe that they are being bullied by the conventional society because they cannot achieve the things and the rod or the measuring rod set by the conventional society. And because they believe that they are being bullied, they respond in that way. You know, sometimes you ask yourself the question, why will someone, a young man or young man, go into someone's home, meet an 82-year-old woman and a 92-year-old man, and They already have them subdued, but yet they will violently deal with them in a particular way when they are no threat to them. They are no threat to them physically, but as far as some of them are concerned, is that high sense of deprivation, that form of bullying as far as they're concerned, that the society meted out to them, they believe they should return in that particular way. They look at it as a form of social justice. I said social injustice. So they reach that point, and that is the reason why I said it is really a battle of the mind. And because of the mindset. So the whole issue is how can we reverse this mindset? But sometimes in our quest to deal with it, we compound the situation by the way how we label and stereotype. Becker, in his work, identified the labeling theory. And he spoke about where you will have one person from a community or one person from a family committing a crime, and we will stereotype and we will deem the whole family. So we say the whole Johnson family because of one are criminals. Brother, sister, everybody. And this time is one person within that family may have committed a crime. And Johnson is from X community. So we also label that community. And what will happen, there is something called self-fulfilling prophecy, where you may find the way how some of the others are treated. They decided that this is the way you all think about me. All right, okay, I will operate in this way. Labeling is real, and we need to take in account those things when we operate, and especially when utilizing the social media and the way we are quick to deem persons and label them in a particular manner. It don't help. And then you have the whole aspect of contextual discrimination. And this is persons who hold power positions, like magistrates, judges, police officers, enforcing the law, and the inequitable way in which decisions might be made, might be how punishment is meted out in decision making within the court. And if someone comes from a particular area or carry a particular name, they get a greater penalty in spite of than someone else. They call it contextual discrimination. And this will have a secondary and something a tertiary effect on close family members, members of the community, in looking in. And it can also foster a certain type of behavior. As I said, it's a battle of the mind. And it's an area that we tend not to deal with. We tend not to look at it. And it's not about anything about making excuses for person and their behavior, but it's to understand what worked through the minds of the individuals. I stand firm on this platform because of my years of experience dealing with persons of criminal minds and interviewing them, talking to them, debriefing them, and you see how they think and how they feel about the society. So something needs to be done about it and need to be handled in a particular way. It's an area that we tend not to look at, that mindset. We just talk about how persons acting out. So what are the factors that motivate the individuals to join the gangs? And we went through a few of them well, and we talk about the financial gain. We talk about some of them join the gangs in order as a means of defense, because they themselves are being victimized. And by joining a gang, they are protected. They get that sense of belonging and inclusion because they might be in a weak family structure. And when I talk about family structure, some persons jump immediately on single parents. Yes, single parents may have challenges, but there are other family structures that are also weak, where you'll have both husband and wife. And what about reconstituted families? And in all those situations, we have weaknesses existing. And some of them, really and truly, like the area of power and control. To compound what we are dealing with, a great percentage of our murders is involving the use of firearms. And firearm possession, the psychology behind firearm possessions, will make a boy become a man, will make a school child become the principal, because they have that measure of control by using that firearm. And especially now, as we have automatic and semi-automatic rifles that are being used, that it put them in this poor position. There are some of them who may have mental health issues. So when you look at the combination, and then to combine the use of drugs, and the drugs I'm referring to don't necessarily have to be cocaine, don't necessarily have, in some instances, marijuana. It is also involved the use of and how they manage the use of alcohol. And that combination of the charismatic leader influencing them, possession of a firearm, which puts them in a poor position, and then the use of drugs. What kind of cocktail you have there? That person might be radicalized to the point of being involved in gangs and have to prove certain things. So with this, we'll have a serious problem on hand. But as everything else, as I come to the end, we must talk about solutions. Chavez Hershey, in his study in the social bonding theory, talk about the whole aspect of attachment, commitment, beliefs, and involvement. He is saying, here what happening. If young persons have that high level of attachment to family, friends, and community, they have a high level of commitment to something, could be a career, success, goals that they can see that they can achieve. They have a high level of belief in positive belief. They see a high level of fairness, morality, and responsibility. And they have a high level of involvement in positive activities like sports, religious groups, social clubs. What will happen is that these control mechanisms will be able to assist, meaning to say that persons who are involved in these things must take it in consideration and make sure that it can reach the threshold that the persons who we considered as being marginalized can in fact be in a position to achieve these goals. In addition, we have the whole aspect of another solution. Another solution coming out of the whole aspect of institutional enemy. Robert Agnew went a little further and he talked about a society equipping itself with well-developed economic safety nets. He talked about welfare. He talked about effective benefits, well-developed healthcare. He talked about programs from institutions that can really help, which can reduce some of the institutional enemy that we are talking about. He's basically is promoting a welfare state that can help. We know that in Trinidad and Tobago, we have several programs running in Trinidad and Tobago. In these programs, we have the Ministry of Youth and National Service. We have the Ministry of Sports and Community Development. We have the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. You have the Ministry of Education. And I put at, not really for any particular reason, the Ministry of National Security. And all these ministries, there's several programs, especially in the Ministry of Youth and National Service. But the question is whether or not all these programs are actually reaching the persons who really and truly need it. Yes, it may be reaching some. And this is where the previous presenter mentioned about community police and doing work within the community. This is necessary because the police can act as the gatekeepers to allow the persons from the social development department to get into some of these communities that under normal circumstances they can't reach. They are the people to get in: the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the counselors, the social workers, probation officers, welfare officers. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have several programs existing. And the question is, what mechanism can we use for us to reach the vulnerable? Yes, it is reaching a number, but we need to go a bit deeper. In Boston, they had a similar issue, and they had the ceasefire approach, which we call focus deterrent. Focus deterrent is based on the hardcore policing approach and also dealing with, as the earlier presenter said, the soft side of getting into the communities and doing the work. That is necessary. But that focus deterrent that I'm talking about is that in Trinidad and Tobago, we also have existing focus deterrent approach that need to be spread within other parts of the country, because we have the Hearts and Minds program run by the IATF within the Beetham, Laventille, Sealots area. And over the years, in fact, it had great successes. In some instances, whether or not impact evaluation was done to see the true outcome. But I could remember the days when the average murders per year in those areas in the Port of Spain division was an average of 105. And the work done over the years, it is now an average of 66 murders per year. Are we satisfied with that? No. But it did in fact have an input and a significant impact. Similar in Boston, they have a serious reduction in murders especially among youth crime. But the killings still exist, but not at the level it existed before. So I support my colleague in taking the approach of looking at the hard and soft approach, but we also need to take in consideration the whole aspect of life skills to be taught, from conflict resolution to anger management, emotional intelligence, behavior modification and training. Training the young people how to deal with stress management, time management, and critical thinking. These skills, if developed within our young persons, can help tremendously in the battle of the mind, in operating as a shield, and in my way, I say as a firewall, to protect them from persons who may be charismatic leaders within the community and is driving our young persons into a direction of crime and violence. So from my perspective, is really a battle of the mind and understanding clearly what are some of the things that will in fact push our young persons to be involved in criminal behavior, and understanding it well can be the only time that we can reach the solution to our problem. You will realize that I spend probably just 30 seconds dealing with the role of the police, which comes at the end of the trail when the persons probably already reach a certain point and the police need to deal with it. But however, over the years, the police have intervened in the early stages, like in the Hearts and Mind programs, Gonzalez Project, and other programs, the RAP programs and other programs within communities. But they need to do it in conjunction with and as they are doing with all the other ministries that exist in order to solve our problems and to reduce radicalism and gang violence in Trinidad and Tobago. So again, thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jacob, for that presentation. I know it was greatly appreciated because it deals with gangs, a topic that is so topical here in Trinidad and Tobago. So you would have looked at this gang culture that prevail in our land. Seen it as a means. It is actually seen as a means of survival. You would have looked at how children would have been socialized from a tender age, and they grow into this, all this thing with the charismatic leadership within our communities, and of course you would have touched on some of the solutions that we can, or that, should be adopted in order to eradicate this gang culture that exists in our society. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Jacob. And Mr. Horn, if I could come back to you, sir. There was a question that was asked, based on your presentation. Mr. Horn, are you there with us?
Yes, Ms. Amir.
Right. So one of the listeners, or one of the persons who are tuned in, they asked a question with respect to the Hearts and Minds approach, right? And they really want to know, how do you propose this integration throughout the service, the section, or the unit?
Let's give me that question one more time, please.
All right.
Which service section or division?
All right. The person would like to know, how do you propose this integration of the Hearts and Mind program? How do you want to see it being structured then throughout services? Maybe the
police service?
Police service, maybe the fire, maybe the prison service, throughout Trinidad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The National Security Services.
Yes,
That's an excellent question for asking that. Through the policing and the military, so the Defense Force, Police Service, they have a more rough exterior compared to the fire service or probably prison officers. What we want to do is to make sure that the public, the persons in the community, is seeing them as human, humanizing the persons from those different services. So they come into the community, they come in without the arms and ammunition, they come in with all the tactical gear. So they come in as a member of the community to integrate themselves within the community. So persons will see the human aspect. And then they're using that, they're leveraging that trust and that respect that comes with it in order to try to turn persons away from thinking about going down the radicalization road. Because just simply going into the community and having a town hall meeting, inviting youths to come and give their experiences, and they give their experiences, not talking down to persons, but listening to them, meeting them where they are, and giving them advice. Because it's very easy to tell persons going down that road is wrong and it's bad. But you have to meet the persons where they are with understanding, and then move from there to show why you shouldn't go down that road. So you're having that safe space for persons from the different services. For example, in schools, it have career days where you have persons from those different services go in and have a chat with the children in the schools and motivate them in order to follow in their footsteps, or even do things that greater than what they would have accomplished by just giving them that advice and spending time with them. So this is an easy way of integrating that. We're doing the same thing in schools, we're doing the same thing within the communities to build back that trust and get persons disrupting that radicalization process.
Okay, thank you much. I know, Mr. Jacob, you too would have mentioned the hearts and mind. Do you have another view as opposed to what Mr. Horn has?
No, well, the Hearts and Minds program consists, as I said, the hard and the soft. In relation to doing work within the community, patrolling within the community, the patrol officers operate both in dealing with the hardcore issues and also dealing with interacting with the community. And you'll have persons who are specialized in dealing with and linking with the various ministries within so that they can get the social workers and other persons within that community to do the work. And they set up police youth clubs. Sometimes you have prisons will have youth clubs in the area, and that work is done in a particular way to really and truly harness the young people to go in a particular direction. Right now, you may have a lot of police youth clubs operating in various areas, but you may not have the IATF aspect of it existing in that way, that focused deterrent approach that took place within the Laventille area. So there's a model, and as you go from community to community, sometimes you need to change the approach because dealing in a rural community might be different from dealing in an urban. So that's the reason why the data and the studies need to be done in a particular way. So when you implement it in an area, you can be effective. So I'm in full agreement with him. You get these schools and other things involved, but the police and the persons on the ground have to play a significant role to get persons from the social department and others to join them in really doing the work and dealing with the whole aspect of the cognitive skills that are required for the young people, and also that aspect of providing the economic support that is necessary.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Horn. Thank you very much, Mr. Jacob. I don't have any more questions at this time. So I will now introduce our third and final speaker for this evening. He is Mr. Ronnie Archibald. He is also an adjunct lecturer here at Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. And Mr. Archibald will be sharing on defining terrorism, issues in terrorism, its ideology, motivation, and countering terrorism measures to combat this phenomenon. So a little bit about Mr. Archibald. He is a leader who has over 15 years of experience in the management and coordination in the areas of health, safety, security, the environment, and emergency management. These sectors he worked in include law enforcement, schools, state enterprises, and retail. Mr. Archibald's career also includes working as a consultant on various projects to develop safety management systems and emergency management programs for several organizations, which cover facilitating drills and other forms of exercise. Mr. Archibald holds a Master of Science degree in Occupational Hygiene with distinction and a Bachelor of Science in Occupational Safety, Health and the Environment from the University of Greenwich School of Business and Computer Sciences. He also holds a Master of Science in Emergency Management with his specialization in terrorism from Walden University. Also from St. Andrews University, He possesses advanced certification in terrorism. From the University of Notre Dame Mendoza College of Business, he holds an executive certificate in leadership and management. And NIBOSH, Health and Safety Executive, he possesses a certificate in process safety management. So over the years, Mr. Archibald has established himself as a trainer and a practitioner in the field. Presently, he's employed at the Occupational Safety and Health Agency as a safety and health inspector, where he enforces the Occupational Safety and Health Act within Trinidad and Tobago. He is also, like I would have said before, a part-time lecturer or an adjunct lecturer at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, where he lectures in crisis and emergency management, terrorism, and health and safety. A core component of Mr. Archibald's skills is the development of policies and systems and setting the objective for those systems for their effectiveness, developing budgets for programs, initiatives, and planning and implementing strategies for the same. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you Mr. Ronnie Archibald, who would be presenting on defining terrorism, issues in terrorism, its ideology, motivation, and countering terrorism measures to combat this phenomenon. Mr. Ronnie Archibald.
Good afternoon. Well, it's evening now. Good evening, Miss Archer. Well, we would have started in the afternoon, and now we are in the evening. Good evening, listeners, and thank you all for being here. Today, we want to take a look at some of the theoretical issues as they related to terrorism and how they can lead to violence, and not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but by extension, the Caribbean. You see, crime and criminality is a current challenge for Trinidad and Tobago. And by extension, the Caribbean, we've seen a rising trend where crime and violence is ever increasing. We look at the island of Trinidad with its high murder rates, Jamaica, St. Vincent. So naturally, there's a phenomenon that is happening in the Caribbean, and this has been brought on by the stresses of the external environment. Okay, the North, as we could look at it, and even what is happening globally. And we're going to look at terrorism in a context where we can see how this can become a problem for us here in Trinidad. One thing we must understand is that terrorism remains a clear and present danger for us all. Terrorism is something that dated back many centuries, and today it still continues. And with the advancement of technology, terrorism has taken on the new means, and terrorists in themselves has become even more emboldened. One would understand there is a history of terrorism in Trinidad and Tobago. And I dare say that the 1990 coup, when we look at it in retrospect, can be described as an act of terrorism. And some people would have already asked me, why would I say that? But when you listen to the leader of that coup at the time and what they were trying to achieve and their objective to that they wanted could suggest that this was an act of terrorism. And if this would have happened after 9/11, then it would have been described as such. Back in 2005, we had the dustbin bombings in Port of Spain. How many of you remember that? And these were acts of terrorism. Remember a number of devices exploding in bins and in the city, resulting in injuries to individuals. And also, we would have seen a number of persons placing threats on the on government ministers, on the prime minister, on the president. And when we go into defining terrorism, we will see why these threats as them in themselves can be described as act of terrorism, because it is designed to inflict fear within the population. Okay, so we would understand that terrorism is largely rooted in politics. And notwithstanding, there are many factors that contribute to this issue globally. This include religion in the form of extreme religious beliefs and ideological beliefs. Furthermore, ideological beliefs compass ideas such as abortion. When you listen to the United States politics, you hear abortion is a very big thing on their agenda. And animal rights, that's another reason why persons would want to engage in acts of terrorism. That's an ideological belief. You will hear, go back to the United States presidential election, they're eating the cats and the dogs, animal rights, and people getting upset about that. Environmental concerns and medical choices, etc. These are all things that can lead to acts of terrorism, right? And terrorism in itself is a method that can be used by any person, group, and for any kind of motive. So one of the things that I want us to understand is terrorism in itself is not confined to any one specific individual, any one specific race, or any one specific religion. Anybody can, or anyone can use terrorism as a means to achieve whatever goals, whatever objective that he or she may have. So when we think of Trinidad and Tobago, we have to understand what we are dealing with, right? So crime and the threat of crime, as we say, is a clear and present danger. And in Trinidad, there's a culture of attraction where young people are attractive to negative influences within the environment. And with the right type of marketing and the right type of exposure, terrorism can become a thing for us here, because young people, or some people within society, I'm not broad brushing all young people, just to be mindful of that, but there is a section of young people within our society that gravitates toward this type of negativity, and it may be seen as a way for them to achieve what they are feeling and what they are expressing. Okay, so we go back to politics, but when we think about politics and terrorism, we have to consider the example of the Irish Republican Army that is in Ireland that want to cede from the British Empire, and then they diminish it very incarnation, in various incarnation. We think of ISIS and it fights in the Middle East. Many refer to ISIS as a religious terrorist group, but really and truly, they are largely a political group that are guided by their religious ideology. If persons think back to when ISIS at its height, ISIS, when they became powerful, they created their state, which they refer to as Raqqa. So that in itself is a political statement. So when we think in our context here in Trinidad, we can see where persons might be motivated by politics. They don't like what they see happening in society, and they resort to violence, right, to achieve their objective. We hear there are chatter within the political sphere that persons are paying criminals to commit murder to make the government look bad, and we're hearing all of these different chatter. Some of us may want to dismiss it, but you can't dismiss it entirely, because there are some validity into such a claim. I'm not saying that is happening because I have no evidence of it, but there are validity that persons can use such a methodology to achieve their objective. So when we think of defining terrorism, this is one that has been well documented, and the consensus is there are no fixed definition for the issue. And this is largely due to the fact that terrorism is a contentious issue and are generally based on individual views, cultural experience, and how they are impacted. Okay, so the word terrorism is often used to evoke emotional responses, justify actions, or label individual. So basically, depending on how you are involved and how terrorism is impacting you will determine your definition. So it is largely agreed that terrorism is used as a tool to coerce government, the civilian population, or any part thereof in furtherance of a social or political objective. And that is the FBI definition here, right? To put it more succinctly, it is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of a political or social objective. So terrorism and terrorists in itself, based on their motivation, is an ideology will select their targets to extract the maximum impact. So based on their motivation or ideology, they will select the target because terrorism itself want to make a statement. Terrorism in itself is a statement. It's designed to send a message to whoever or the segment of the community or the government that they are communicating with. So we have to consider the old saying of one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So for example, think about the Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah conflict, right? That is currently ongoing. Who is the terrorist and who is the victim? Depending on where you are, you may have a different view, right? Some people would say Hamas and Hezbollah, they are the terrorists. Some people will say Israel is acting based on terrorism, right? But funny enough, a state in itself carrying out an act against another state is a declaration of war. But when we look at Hamas and Hezbollah, they are a subnational group operating within a state. So they can be described by them as terrorists. But depending on how you view it, persons will refer to who they want to refer to as the terrorists. So for the person in Palestine, Hamas and Hezbollah are their freedom fighters. But for the people in Israel, they are their terrorists, right? And vice versa. And we also look at the conflict in Turkey and the Kurds, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. We would have seen recently where the PKK would have carried out some acts of terrorism in Turkey, and their fight for their seeking their homeland and to establish a Kurdish homeland, and that fight has been going on for a very long time. So there are a lot of historical factors that ties into terrorism, and or ties into what motivates a person. And this in itself leads to acts of terrorism. Okay, terrorism in itself is different from other types of violence and or action that is carried by individuals or subnational groups. So when we think of the action of a state against another state, this would be considered an act of war. So if one country invade another country, that in itself is an act of war. That would not be classified as terrorism. And I want us to understand, sometimes when you listen to the news and you hear persons classifying different acts in different ways, we ask ourselves, where did they come up with that? Okay. But when we understand different means and acts of violence and criminality are classified differently. Okay. So we see that as the act of war where one country would invade another. The violent action of an individual or group against another because of their race, their ethnicity, orientation, culture, and the likes would be considered a hate crime. So we saw where one guy would have went into a church in the US. A white guy went into a church filled with black worshippers, and he would have killed a number of them. That in itself would be considered a hate crime. Okay, And what distinguish all of these action is what the person is trying to achieve, the objective. What do they want to achieve? The violent action of one individual or group against another. Example, active shooting in school. This might be done by an angry student, and this in itself is in its essence an act of criminality. Some people would often ask me why they haven't described that as an act of terrorism. Is it because of the person who is carrying out the action? And I would often let them know, hey, it's not about who is carrying out the action. It's really about what the person is trying to achieve and their objective. And that will determine whether it is described as a hate crime or an act of criminality. It's really a thin line that define all of these actions. So when we understand the definition of terrorism, we would then look and see there are a lot of issues that exist in international terrorism, and we want to know who is a terrorist, right? In essence, a terrorist is anyone that carries out the act of terrorism for whatever cause he or she may represent, that is designed to influence people and political behavior. So or political decisions, and terrorism is very effective in influencing political decisions. So what that means is anyone can be a terrorist. Anyone can be a terrorist, and terrorism over the years has evolved. The methodology, the target, the tactics adopted by terrorists in recent decades has changed drastically today. And we see where those are changed because of a number. We talk about technology has changed. And we'll talk a little bit on globalization and how globalization has influenced terrorism today. So there are some elements of terrorism that we would understand that it is premeditated. It is political in its nature. It is generally aimed at civilians. You know, when we talk about guerrilla warfare and how that differs from terrorism, guerrilla warfare generally targets military infrastructure and government infrastructure. But when you think of terrorism, they target civilians because they're looking at sending a strong message towards a government or even towards a segment of society. And terrorism is carried out by subnational groups. Okay? So a state in itself don't carry out acts of terrorism. A state may sponsor terrorism. So they may arm a group, they may provide them with the means for carrying out, and they remain silent behind the scene. And some of the tactics that may include that terrorists may use, it could be bombings, suicide attacks, vehicle-based attacks. They could even use aircraft, as we would have seen in 9/11 hijackings, the use of chemical and biological weapons, the use of conventional weapons such as guns, and increasingly beheading. I often ask persons, what if COVID-19 was an act of terrorism? Well, can you imagine that and the impact it would have had? Because it may have been an act of terrorism for financial gain that just went out of control, right? The release of a biological weapon for financial gain, who knows, right? It's just a theory. So what are some of the possible targets when we're thinking about terrorism and how we're going to treat with the issue? We have to think of our critical infrastructure. Very often terrorists want to target your critical infrastructure, those infrastructure that needs to operate at a minimum to allow your country to function. And these are the areas that we have to protect. Your transportation hubs and your high traffic areas, government buildings and your infrastructures, right? Critical infrastructures within your country, including your electricity installations. And these are specified targets of interest that terrorists would want to use. And if a terrorist is looking at impacting the government negatively, then chances are these are the targets they're going to select. So how do we determine what a target a terrorist is likely to select. Very often, terrorists put out their manifestos. They often speak. They want to communicate a message. So you have to listen to these individuals and see what they are saying. And then you can basically identify through this open source what are these persons' ideology, what motivates them, and try to determine what target they are going to select and how they can impact upon your infrastructure. Okay, what does a terrorist want to achieve? Why do I carry out an act of terrorism? What are my objective? You know, why would I want to inflict such damage? Why would I want to inflict such hurt? Because you want to create an atmosphere of fear. You want the population to react to you in a certain way. You want to force change to systems within a particular jurisdiction within the country. The terrorists want change. And the only way to achieve that change is to carry out an act of terrorism. So you're creating the mindset of the people that the government cannot protect you. And if the government cannot protect you, then you need to remove the government. Okay? For criminal gain, people engage in acts of terrorism for criminal gains. Right? They want to embarrass governments, create panic. They want media attention, talks about intimidation, mass casualty, right? So these are their multiple objectives that the terrorist is trying to achieve, and we have to understand and try to determine what are those objectives. And what we understand some of those objectives, we understand their potential targets, and we know what their likely modus operandi and what they're going to use, and then we can come up with scenarios to treat with it. We determine what their end game would be. And once you can determine their end game, then you can put systems in place to treat with it. Okay. Terrorists has always used violence to achieve their aims. And these individuals are not very concerned about human rights, but more so about their personal agenda. And if a terrorist don't get you when they are coming, they get you when they're leaving. So you have to be very mindful of terrorists are very dangerous people, which require a very strategic approach to addressing the situation. And there's a lot of nuances in terrorism today, and this is brought about by many parts globalization. We see globalization, the introduction of the internet and social media. This has provided terrorists with a platform to spread their propaganda. It provides them with a platform to recruit individuals to their network and finance their campaign. So social media is a very integral part today in the issue as it relates to terrorism. So parents do have a role to play in what their children look at and what they are listening to. I remember I often share this story when I was doing my studies in terrorism, and I just doing some research, and I went online and said terrorism studies. And by a couple of clicks, I end up in a chat room. And I share this with my students all the time, and just end up in a chat room and someone tried to radicalize me in there. And I'm like, okay, I'll get back to you. And I left. And that person could have told me exactly where I'm at. Well, they probably don't know my exact location, but they know I was from Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm like, okay, interesting. And that is how easy it is to become radicalized on the internet. Just going about doing your search and person can target you. Maybe I was targeted because I was doing my research and looking for information. And my search may have popped up. You never know. So you have to be very mindful of this. And this was many years ago when I was conducting my studies. So the internet, social media, this has become a haven for terrorists wanting to radicalize your person. So you have to be very mindful of what your children are doing online and who is influencing them, who is talking to them through games. Some of the games that the children are playing, the young people are playing game and they're having conversation with one another. And these mediums can be used to radicalize your children into terrorism. So according to Joker here, globalization and terrorism are two concepts that are intertwined. And although globalization has resulted in development of societies, their economies, and politics, technology, and social culture, is also argued that globalization breeds terrorism. Thus, terrorism and other related violent activities are consequences of globalization. The ease of traveling, ease of person moving from one place to another has created a challenge where that is concerned. And globalization is seen as the integration of markets, politics, values, and environmental concerns across the globe, interlinking culture, and that interlinking culture can become a challenge. If I belong to some radical group within my country that holds strict belief, and then this interlinking this Western culture pervading in our Eastern culture, that in itself could be a challenge that can lead to terrorism and radicalize the minds of the young people. Okay, the issue of globalization has seen the world become closer through those various free trade agreements and economies. And globalization in itself presents that challenge that can lead to acts of terrorism. So we have to look at all of these factors and see how our young people in this country are exposed to the wider market and the wider world, and how that can influence their behavior, their attitudes. Okay. We understand some causes of terrorism include, so when we think of, and those are some of the issues related to international terrorism, but when we think of terrorism in itself has two main factors: motivation and ideology. Okay, all acts of terrorism are based on some form of motivation or ideology, and some motivating cause of terrorism could be injustice, motivated by human suffering. Okay, politics, political motivation, poverty, motivated by circumstances, illiteracy, persons want to get involved in terrorism for finances. Back in the heyday of ISIS, you said if you go and fight for ISIS, you're getting $1,000 a day. That sounds very attractive to someone who doesn't have money. Okay, religion and ideological beliefs. And we understand that terrorism is a global issue. So when we understand that terrorism is a global issue, we understand that there is no single identity to who is a terrorist. This identity can explain terrorist sympathy as well as terrorist activities. For example, the funding of terrorism. And this can be very sensitive to perception of injustice against people. I see a group of people in one part of the world that are suffering, and they're fighting and they're struggling against their government. And I decide, you know what, I want to sympathize with them, so let me fund their action. So that is terrorist financing right there, and use that through money laundering. Then we ask ourselves, why did so many Trinidadians left and went to Syria to fight for ISIS? Right, and this can suggest to be based on perceived injustice and religious identity. There might be some other underlying cause. So when we think of motivation and ideology, persons are motivated by what is happening in their environment, the stimulus in the world that they feel like they can relate to, as opposed to ideology, where a person's think or believe and who they are. So identity adopted by terrorists include attitudes, beliefs, and values that justify violent acts. And this often in pursuit of a noble end, because to them, what I am doing is justifiable. Okay? So what a person identify with can determine the course of action they take, and whether it's a political view or extreme religious view. And there are several factors that motivate people as well, again, to participate or carry out. We talk about historical conflict. And if we go back to the Israel-Palestine conflict, this is a historical conflict. When you drive down the highway in Trinidad, you will see the graffitis on the wall that talks about Israel and the United States. This in itself, because people feel a great sense of connection to what is happening there, and that it can motivate persons to carry out an act of terrorism in Trinidad against American interests or Israeli interests. Once they have the means and the motive and everything else to carry out that, they can do that, because they have the means to go and write it on the wall and express how they're feeling. a country's foreign policy. We see some foreign policy of a country where that can be very harsh on another country. Some countries imposing sanctions on another country. So the people in those countries suffer because of those sanctions, etc. So all acts of terrorism, we said, are based on some form of ideology and motivation. And some terrorists are motivated by money. So individuals can release a weapon of mass destruction for financial gain. And I actually go back to the question, what if Corona was released for financial gain through the sale of vaccine and pharmaceutical products? Who knows? What if Ebola was released for the sale of vaccine and pharmaceutical products? That's just a theoretical thinking, right? So that's motivation there. When we think of ideology, this, as defined by David McIntyre, is a set of beliefs related to values, attitudes, ways of thinking, and goals. And there are multiple ideologies that are related to terrorism, right? It may be related to politics, race, religion, and nationalism, right? Some terrorists are nationalistic as they look at promoting race, ethnicity, particular culture, and language. We see a lot of this in the United States with the right-wing movement. This is heavily in that regard, right? We saw motivation. We see the bombing of the Planned Parenthood back in 2015 in the United States because some persons are so opposed to abortion and the means by which persons are having their children, so that they will carry out acts of terrorism to stop that. So it is identified where ideological, political, economic, regional, and demographic and psychological causes all contributing factors to terrorism. Thus, persons with power and authority to make the necessary changes must do so without hesitation. But frankly, these individuals refuse to act because it doesn't suit their agenda, and they are not willing to disrupt their political and power structure to accommodate persons who they believe that are lesser. So when we think of that in that regard, they're not willing to treat with that, but that is the approach they have to take. They have to change the circumstances in which people live. They have to change people's financial situation to address the issues in global terrorism. And I'm concluding here now. So to combat the issue of global terrorism and the likely impact it can have on us, one must address the issue of the source. And the source include what is causing terrorism, the perceived injustice and global inequality, where the lives of one is seemingly more important than the other or the others. One life is more valuable than the thousands of lives in one country. The greed that man possess in furtherance of their own selfish objective and their narrow interests. We want to protect our interests, and their interest is more important than the interest of all others, right? The interest of remaining in power and maintaining the power structure and the elite structure within a society, that in itself has to break down to some extent to resolve the issue of terrorism. Violence will, we talk about also the increasing stress brought on by sanctions, wars, and government corruption. These are some of the issues that has to be addressed to eliminate terrorism. And violence will lead to more violence. So using violence to address terrorism in itself, engaging in war as a counter-terrorism measure, while it may be effective to some extent, it's not going to be fully effective, because you're just going to enrage the people more. That's why former Commissioner Jacob spent all about 3 seconds talking about policing, right? Because that is the end result. But you want to deal with the issue that caused the action in the first place. So policies must be directed at de-escalating tension, notwithstanding their individuals with extreme ideologies that are not easily tamed. So because of these ideologies are not easily tamed, you would necessarily have to take another course of action. But you have to look at the softer approach to addressing the issues that are occurring globally. When some people are very well fed and others are hungry, that in itself is a problem. Okay? So, according to Noboru here in 2017, you have to treat with the threat of terrorism, and you must take into you must take into consideration confronting the ever-growing threat of mass destruction and murder by a range of methods. You have to adapt to the changing means by which terrorist groups direct and manage such organizations, functions, as fundraising, recruitment, planning, preparation, and implementation, and the likes. Okay? And you have to pursue long-term policies and strategies that address the condition that give rise to terrorism. Right? We may erase ISIS gains, but we doesn't erase the mentality and the mindset that is existing. So I emphasize on the point that we have to change the circumstances that are causing terrorism. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have to look at our political structure and see how this can influence acts of terrorism. We also have to look at the gang culture and see if this can escalate to acts of terrorism. We have to look at the circumstances and the stresses within the environment and address it there before it escalates. And that is my presentation there this evening. Thank you very much for listening. I'll take any questions now.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Archibald, for that that presentation. You really took a deep dive into terrorism and defining it and looking at it from different different points of views, the political, just the individual level, the level of the individuals, persons, their fears and these different things that make them actually want to do or even get involved in terrorism. Looking at these different groups in the Middle East, Hezbollah, Hamas, and that war that we all know is still raging, even though they may have a ceasefire right now, but war is war, it's still there. So wow, that's all I can say. Wow, thank you very much. For that. I always wanted to find out, or maybe I should ask this question. What is your view really with respect to persons who would have left Trinidad, went abroad to fight as a terrorist? And what do you believe that the government, our government here in Trinidad and Tobago, should do? Should they bring them back if they want to come back here to Trinidad, or should they be left outside there in those countries?
It's part of the issue is persons would have left Trinidad and go to the Middle East to fight because they identify with the sufferings of the people and what they were experiencing. If you ask me my personal opinion on bringing back persons who have been engaged in such an action, I don't know if I agree with it, because I often ask myself, what are they coming back to do? How are they going to be integrated into society? What would then be their role and function within society? So it's a really ticklish question. Notwithstanding, persons have to be dealt with and from where they're at. So you have to create some situation where their mindset are changed. You have to provide counseling for them, and this may be long term. So if they do they still hold that belief? Well, for the most part, most of the men would have died, and now it would have been children, and so it's a tight dance for me. I am wavering on that one, but I'm slightly on no if you ask me. But I'm wavering whether they should come back, because how are they going to be integrated into society?
Yes. Okay. Well, I kind of share your view.
Yeah.
How are they going to be, reintegrated back into society? So I guess that's a critical problem for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to deal with.
Yeah, and we already have a crime problem. So
And
I'm not
yeah,
sure if this is going to contribute to it, because we may not necessarily we don't have a structure here to monitor effective. Do we have a structure to monitor effectively and keep an eye on these individuals as they continue live within the society? I don't know if we do have that.
Yes. Mr. Horn, do you have a view?
Miss, I also share the view that those persons should be stateless. They should stay where they are. However, if the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is to take the position that we are going to welcome those persons back in, the systems that doesn't exist at present must be developed. And this will take me right back into counter and violent extremism, because that term and those strategies would develop primarily for persons who would have been radicalized along the terrorist lines, but it could be applied to persons who committing serious crimes. So one, systems will have to be in place in order to monitor those persons. So you'll have to have effective surveillance for those persons at home, at work, if they are reintegrated into working, for the children at school, because you don't know what process the children would have gone through. And then if they are integrated into school without effective monitoring, they could now start radicalizing their peers. So we must have those things in place if we are to welcome those persons into our country, because we don't want it to exacerbate what already exists when it comes to crime in this country. So we will have to take a very serious look at implementing counter violent extremism strategies to get them to unlearn the things that they would have been taught, to get them to that process of radicalization.
All right. Thank you much. And what about you, Mr. Jacob?
Well, you remember the Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory to a lot of international conventions. And you are dealing, in some instances, you're dealing with a lot of persons who are over there who's under the age of 18. And even though they were radicalized, some were radicalized while they are a child. So you need to take that seriously in consideration into the group of persons who need to return. It is, in fact, a humongous task on the administration if the persons return. As I said in my presentation, it's a battle of the mind. And how can you now cause these persons to start to look at things in a particular way and think in a particular way after they are radicalized? What we can do is look at best practices and see probably what is working and how we can, in fact, organize it to suit our environment. But we need to face it and we'll have to deal with it. And the question of whether or not they should stay abroad, yes or no, or return to Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, there is a governmental decision that needs to be made. But because of the conventions and international conventions, Trinidad and Tobago may have no alternative but to do what is required to be done. But we need to be careful. We need to be careful and put things in place because, as mentioned earlier, we already have a crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are quite aware what took place during our early times of when persons were deported. And when they were deported to Trinidad and Tobago from the United States, some of them were already involved in gang activities. And that assisted in propelling gang violence in Trinidad and Tobago with the skills that they learn abroad that they brought to Trinidad and Tobago. So that is a clear example. So it must be done in an organized and a thoughtful manner.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed. So, well, in the interest of time, we really have to wrap up, even though the discussion now start to get kind of, you know, nice. But I would um, I would want to say thanks to you again, gentlemen, Mr. Horn, Mr. Jacob, and Mr. Archibald, for taking time off, from your schedule to be here with us this afternoon, to share, your views and so forth as it pertains to what we have been looking at, this whole idea of radicalization, here in Trinidad and Tobago, and you know, to some extent, well, we kind of touch on it, on it globally. So, I want to say thanks to the director of this college, Dr. Andre Vincent Henry, for allowing us this platform, so that you gentlemen, you all could share some insight into this topic: countering violent behaviors, the disruption of radical behaviors here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thanks again to Mr. Olhorn, Mr. McDonald Jacob, and Mr. Ronnie Archibald again for sharing your thoughts and your insights into this topic. Again, I apologize for the disruption in with respect to the Wi-Fi. This is something that you really can't control. Mr. Brown, he was really determined to come on, and do his part, but because of the difficulties that he was experiencing, it was not possible. Right. So, and of course, I want to say thanks to our listening audience. Thank you for whatever questions and comments you would have made, and you too for taking time off from your schedule to be with us here today. So, I hope that what we would have shared here this afternoon, it would have brought some clarity and some understanding to your views and your thoughts as it pertains to countering violent extremism. And for that, I would say have a good night and thank you.